But before we dive into the disturbing tales of the night, let me ask you, do you have the courage to stay until the end? Most viewers don't subscribe to the channel, perhaps out of oversight, or perhaps because, after hearing these stories, they never slept the same way again. If you think you can handle it, click subscribe now. It was 2:15 a.m. County General's emergency room was in its usual ghostly routine. Fluorescent lights buzzing, footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, the distant beeping of heart monitors. It was my third month as a resident at the hospital, and I was already used to the peculiar silence of the early mornings. But tonight, there was something different. It wasn't a sound or a specific sight. It was a feeling. A strange weight on my chest, as if someone was standing behind me, watching me. Dr. Hale, my senior on shift, was at the nurse's station scribbling something in a chart. He looked up, looking tired, and asked, "Did you see him?" I stopped what I was doing. "See what?" He pointed with his chin towards the hallway. "The guy from room 209. I thought he just walked by." I felt a chill on the back of my neck. "Doctor, the patient in room 209 died 4 hours ago." Hale was silent for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "I know." I swallowed hard. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "I saw him, and I wasn't the only one. Nurse Simmons, a veteran woman and skeptical by nature, had also seen something. Minutes before, she swore she saw a figure standing in the hallway with its back to her. When she blinked, there was nothing there anymore. With a lump in my throat, I went to room 209. The door was ajar, and the dim light illuminated the bed, empty. The sheet was stretched out, immaculate, but it wasn't supposed to be like that. A few hours earlier, that bed had housed the lifeless body of an elderly man, the victim of a car accident. I myself had helped prepare the body for the morgue. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway. I turned around reflexively. Nothing. The hallway was deserted. I was about to call Hale when something paralyzed me. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw a shadow standing at the end of the hallway. Tall, thin, in a hospital gown. He was looking at me. I whirled around in surprise. The hallway remained empty. An icy shiver ran down my spine. "This can't be happening." Hale approached, his face pale. "We need to see the security cameras. Now." We went to the monitoring room where Roy, the on-duty security guard, greeted us with a confused look. "I need the recordings from the hallway of room 209. Roy pulled up the video from 2:10 a.m., a few minutes before Hale had seen the patient. The hallway appeared on the screen, grainy and monochrome, and it was empty. I fast-forwarded the footage. Nothing, no movement, no shadow. Hale and I looked at each other uneasy. This doesn't make sense. Then Roy stopped the recording suddenly. In the corner of the screen, almost imperceptible, a dark silhouette appeared for a moment. I stopped breathing. The shadow was standing at the end of the hallway, but something was wrong with it. Its feet weren't touching the ground. We stood there in silence while the figure on the screen dissolved into nothingness. Roy cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "You know what's strange?" "What?" Hale asked. "Room 209 was closed 20 years ago, after the fire." My heart stopped. "Fire? What fire?" Roy stared at us, confused. "Didn't you know? The entire ward caught fire. Many patients died trapped in their rooms." I swallowed hard. But that room is still in use. I treated a patient there today." Roy frowned. "Impossible. That ward was never reopened." Hale looked at me, his eyes wide. The security camera hadn't lied. The patient in room 209 never existed, but somehow he was still there. Hospitals have a strange silence late at night. It's not a silence of tranquility, but of something suspended in the air, as if the walls were holding their breath along with the patients. I've worked at St. Vincent's Medical Center for over 20 years. and I can say that the ICU has a rhythm of its own. After midnight, things usually calm down, but that night the hospital seemed different. The air was heavy. The hum of the machines was more annoying than usual. The hallway seemed longer than it should be. Then the loudspeaker cut through the silence. Code Blue, room 204. Code Blue, room 204. My stomach sank. The problem: room 204 was empty. I stopped what I was doing and looked at my colleagues. Everyone had the same confused expression. It wasn't uncommon for rooms to remain unoccupied for a while, but a code blue meant a patient was in cardiac arrest. This couldn't be happening. I grabbed the defibrillator and ran down the hallway. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing above seemed louder. The shadows stretched in a strange way on the walls. When I arrived at room 204, I stopped at the door. It was open, and the room was empty. No patient, no occupied bed. Just a made bed, as if no one had slept there. Then the heart monitor beeped. I froze. The shrill sound filled the room, coming from the corner where the heart rate number flashed red on the screen. But there was no one in the bed. An icy shiver ran down my spine. This can't be real, I murmured, pressing the intercom button. Code Blue, no patient. I repeat, there is no one in room 204. My voice trembled. Seconds later, my colleagues came running in, and we all saw it. The machines in the room began to flash and hum. The ventilator turned on by itself, blowing air to no one. The infusion pumps made a dry noise as they activated, as if administering medication to an invisible patient. And the heart monitor. The heart monitor oscillated as if a heart was beating. A suffocating silence took over the room. The monitor flashed a few times, then the screen showed something that made the blood run cold in my veins. Time of death, 11:59 p.m. The clock on the wall read 11:57 p.m. What the hell is going on here? One of the nurses murmured. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. I need to see the old records for this room. I left the ICU, leaving the team trying to understand what had just happened. I went to the hospital archives. The old folders had a smell of dust and aged paper. My hands trembled as I leafed through the records for room 204. And then I found it. A list of deaths. The first name, patient deceased on March 3rd, 1993. Time of death, 12 a.m. I continued to leaf through. Another patient, March 3rd, 1987. Time of death, 12 a.m. Another, March 3rd, 1981. Time of death, 12 a.m. My hands became sweaty. Every year someone died in that room, always on the same day, always at midnight, until 20 years ago, the hospital closed room 204 to new admissions. But that early morning, it called a code blue all on its own. My stomach churned. Then I saw a note attached to the last page of the file. The shaky handwriting read, "Always on the full moon." I swallowed hard. I ran back to the ICU. The monitors were still flashing. The heart rate number had decreased, as if something was dying there. Again, I looked at the window. The full moon shone in the sky. At that moment, I realized the truth. It wasn't a mistake. Room 204 was waiting for its next patient. Hospitals are strange at night. The hallways seem longer, the sounds echo in a wrong way, and even the shadows seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. I worked in maintenance at Memorial Hospital, and my shift was always in the early hours of the morning. The routine was boring, checking ventilation systems, testing generators, changing flickering light bulbs. But that night, I received a strange call. The phone rang at 2:30 a.m. "The elevator is malfunctioning," said the nurse at the reception desk, her voice a little shaky. "It keeps going to the 3rd floor, all by itself." The 3rd floor, the floor that was closed over 30 years ago. I sighed, grabbing my flashlight and toolbox. There were rumors about that floor. They said something happened there in the past, but nobody really knew what. The hospital renovated some parts of the building, but that floor was forgotten. Arriving at the elevator lobby, I saw the small digital display flashing 3rd floor. The doors were slightly open. I approached and pressed the button. The elevator slowly descended to the ground floor. The doors opened with a metallic screech. I entered and examined the controls. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for one thing. The buttons on the panel were ice cold to the touch, as if someone had held them for too long. I ignored the discomfort and pressed the button to test the ascent. The elevator started to move, but then the lights flickered. The control panel made a strange noise, like a distorted electronic hum. I looked at the digital display. 3rd floor. The doors opened, and all I saw was darkness. That floor shouldn't be accessible. But there it was, waiting. The only illumination came from the dim light of the elevator, casting strange shadows in the hallway. The air was heavy, as if no one had breathed there for decades. "Come on, let's just take a look and leave," I muttered to myself, holding my flashlight firmly. I stepped out of the elevator. The floor was covered in dust. But as I illuminated the ground, I noticed footprints. Fresh footprints. I was alone. My heart raced. I looked around. The doors of the old rooms were closed, some with rusty plaques. Room 301, Room 302, Room 303. At the end of the hallway, a door was open, and then I heard it. A low shuffling sound, like something scraping on the floor. The light from my flashlight trembled as I raised my arm. Tick, 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 as if fingernails were tapping slowly on the tile. I swallowed hard. I turned the flashlight towards the open door, and then I saw the face, or at least what should be a face. It was very pale, with a crooked smile and black eyes, deep like empty holes. The body was very thin, the bones projecting under a dry, bluish skin. The thing was dragging itself slowly across the floor, its long fingernails scraping the tiles. It stopped, and then it smiled wider. An icy air ran down my spine. I took a step back, my body trembling. The creature moved faster. I ran to the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly. "Go, go, go!" The lights flickered violently. The elevator didn't move. The sound of scraping on the floor grew louder. I held the flashlight with trembling hands and turned around. The thing was at the entrance of the elevator, so close that I could see its cracked skin and the uneven, dirty teeth, as if they were falling apart. It opened its mouth, and then the doors closed. The elevator plummeted. My stomach churned as the cabin shook and the floors passed in a blur. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the impact, but it stopped gently on the ground floor. The doors opened. I ran out and looked back. The elevator was empty, but the footprints were there, coming out of the elevator and going in the opposite direction. I dropped my tools and got out of there. The next day, they interdicted the elevator. They said it was a mechanical problem, but I know the truth. Something is up there, something that the hospital tried to forget, and now it's no longer trapped. Children's hospitals are never completely silent. Even in the early hours of the morning, there's the beeping of monitors, the whisper of nurses, the distant sound of a baby crying. Working in the neonatal unit of St. Joseph's Hospital, I had grown accustomed to these sounds. But that night at 3:17 a.m., I heard a different cry. It was a distant, muffled sound, as if it were coming from an empty place. Automatically, I checked the babies in the incubators. Nothing. They were all sleeping peacefully. Still, the crying continued. It was a low, thin lament filled with despair. I shuddered. The sound seemed to be coming from an empty incubator in the corner of the room. This doesn't make sense. I approached slowly, trying to calm my own breathing. The soft lights of the neonatal ICU flickered slightly as I scanned the transparent crib. It was empty, but the crying was still there. I touched the acrylic lid. It was ice cold. and then I saw it. On the inside, on the glass, there were marks. Marks of tiny hands. Hands that shouldn't be there. I took a step back, my heart racing. Those marks weren't there before. But now, there were even small trails of fingers sliding, as if something was trying to get out. The crying stopped suddenly. The silence weighed heavily. The air in the room became dense, as if something was watching me. Then a low voice whispered behind me, "Mommy?" I turned around immediately. Nobody. Nothing. I looked around the ICU. The other incubators were as usual, the babies sleeping. But then, the monitor on the empty incubator turned on by itself. The numbers started flashing. Heart rate, 132 BPM. Oxygen level, 97%. Blood pressure, stable. As if there were a baby there. My skin crawled all over, and then the alarm went off. That sharp, emergency beep. But there was no one to rescue. The empty incubator was no longer empty. I felt a strong presence next to me, as if someone was standing there with me. A shadow formed inside the glass, and then the incubator turned off by itself. The handprints disappeared. The monitor went silent. The entire hospital went silent. And whatever was there was gone. But I knew it would be back. The next day, I researched that incubator. It had been in the hospital for over 30 years, and decades ago a baby died in it, alone. Since then, sometimes, he cries for his mother. I had worked at the hospital for years, and the night shift always had its strange moments. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I saw that early morning. It was Halloween, and I was alone in the CT scan room, waiting for my shift to end. The MRI machine was turned off for maintenance, so when the deep hum of the coil suddenly started vibrating, something was wrong. I approached the control panel frowning. The screen flickered. A scan was initiated on its own. I looked at the gurney inside the CT scan room. It was empty, but the machine kept running as if it was scanning something invisible. The air around me grew heavy. The display on the screen changed. An image appeared. At first, it looked like a blur, but then a shape began to appear. A skeleton. It wasn't of a regular patient. The bones were elongated, twisted, wrong. Something non-human. I froze. The image became clearer. You could see the skull. It had no eyes, just a huge slit like a mouth, stretched too far. My fingers trembled. The machine started to screech, the screen flickering uncontrollably. Then the thing turned its head and looked directly at the camera. I screamed and fell backwards. The screen went blank. The sound stopped. The only noise was my own breathing, heavy and ragged. I slowly got up and went to the window of the CT scan room. The glass reflected the interior of the room. The gurney was empty. But there, on the other side of the reflection, someone was watching me, and then disappeared. I ran out of the room and didn't go back until the sun came up. The next morning, when the technicians arrived to check the machine, one of them looked at me and asked, "Who ran this scan overnight?" My mouth went dry. "Nobody." He frowned and turned the screen towards me. The last scan was saved. The file had a date and time. 3:33 a.m. and the patient's name, unknown. I never went into that room alone again. And if one day you hear the MRI machine turning on by itself, don't look at the screen. If this story chilled you, like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. And remember, not all the patients that show up on the CT scan are alive.